If you've ever had a checkup, then BMI definitely appears somewhere in your medical record, and it might be the most controversial term there. BMI, short for body mass index, is a simple measure of height and weight used to estimate body fat, but lately it's gotten a lot of flack.
I do have a BMI of 30. I've been considered overweight my whole life.
If you just look at the BMI, I'm considered overweight.
The index did not take into consideration muscle mass, body composition, or even general health.
Are these knocks on BMI fair? And if they are, why haven't doctors ditched the concept entirely? Let's talk about BMI, the problems with it, how I still use it, and what I think might replace it in the not so distant future. The concept of BMI was invented in the 1830s by a Belgian mathematician named Adolphe Quetelet, who had zero plans to create any sort of health metric. The guy was just obsessed with the ideal human body and wanted a way to calculate the size of an average person. And person really meant white man, since Quetelet only included Western European men in his experiments. He came up with a formula and called it the Quetelet index, weight divided by height squared. What happened next? The Quetelet index gathered dust for almost 150 years. Then in 1972, American physiologist Ansel Keys rebooted it and renamed it BMI. Keys and his colleagues ran a study to show that BMI could analyze obesity at the population level. It wasn't perfect, but good enough. Their study was somewhat more inclusive than Quetelet's experiments, but it wasn't that inclusive. It involved healthy men from just a few ethnic groups who definitely didn't represent the entire spectrum of body types. And at that point, experts had only recently realized that obesity was becoming a societal health problem. In fact, for a decent part of the 20th century, weight wasn't even seen as relevant to health. Instead, being overweight was mainly considered a cosmetic issue. It was insurance companies who figured out that heavier policyholders had shorter life expectancies. Then, of course, they just charged larger people higher rates.
Give me your money, punk.
Today, we obviously know a lot more about the health effects of obesity. Those with it have a heightened risk of developing various diseases and negative health outcomes, including type 2 diabetes, heart conditions, multiple types of cancer, and unfortunately, death. BMI was used the way Ansel Keys intended, strictly for population health, until the 90s, when medical organizations started using BMI ranges to categorize body weight. A BMI of 30 became the cutoff point for an unhealthy weight, and people with 30 or higher BMIs were classified as overweight. BMI wasn't actually calculated during most appointments until around the 2010s. In an effort to focus on prevention, the official recommendation for US primary care docs was to use BMI to screen for obesity. For patients who met the 30 BMI cutoff, doctors were supposed to offer counseling on diet and exercise. By 2019, BMI was exploding and measured at almost all doctors' visits. Health insurance companies have also leaned into BMI. They created cutoff points to approve or deny weight loss treatments. Very commonly, I have patients who require medications like Ozempic or Wegovy get denied solely based on their BMI. As BMI has become more widely used in healthcare, it's received more and more criticism. BMI critics include doctors, patients, public health experts, fat acceptance groups, bodybuilders, and more. Some people want to kick BMI to the curb, while others just want to see it used less. At a high level, there are 3 big problems with BMI that you need to know about. BMI doesn't measure what it's supposed to. Having a larger body isn't inherently harmful. The real risk factor, the thing that's specifically linked to obesity-related diseases, is having a high percentage of body fat. More specifically, a high amount of abdominal fat, which strongly predicts obesity-related diseases, while fat around the hips and thighs matters less. BMI doesn't even really measure body fat. It can't determine fat versus muscle percentage or distinguish between good and bad fat types. Instead, it just measures body size and uses that as a proxy, essentially a guess, a decent guess, for body fat. However, you can weigh a lot for your height and still be healthy. That means someone who's incredible shaped, ripped head to toe, could have a high enough BMI to be considered clinically obese. If any group of people proves this point, it's elite athletes. On the flip side, you can fall within a normal weight range and have more abdominal fat and less muscle than you should. The BMI scale isn't inclusive. I mentioned that BMI was basically developed from data on healthy white men, both when it was first invented and then again when it was relaunched in the 70s. This matters a lot. because diseases can show up in different ways in different groups of people. Clinical obesity is defined as a BMI of 30 or higher for all adults. 30 makes sense as a cutoff for younger and middle-aged white men because their risk of type 2 diabetes increases starting at 30. But that's not the case for everyone. One 2021 study from the UK looked at the relationship between BMI and type 2 diabetes in more than 1 million people from 5 ethnic groups: white, South Asian, Black, Chinese, and Arab. Participants did not start off with diabetes, but 6.5 years later, researchers followed up to see which had developed diabetes and then figured out the BMI cutoff associated with an increased risk for each group. The number wasn't the usual 30 for any non-white group. What does that mean? Well, it means that many non-white people who wouldn't be diagnosed with obesity based on their BMI actually have an elevated risk of type 2 diabetes, and they're slipping through our cracks in our system. But why is ethnicity even relevant? Why would a 24 BMI be healthy weight for a white person, but not for a South Asian person? The reasons are truly complex and aren't even fully understood yet. One factor seems to be the relationship between ethnicity and body composition. The amount of muscle and body fat someone has, how fat is distributed, and the type of fat are all aspects of body composition. Some research suggests that people of Asian descent tend to have more fat around the organs called visceral fat, which is a type more strongly linked to type 2 diabetes. While there may be other ethnic-based differences in body shape and composition, like having longer or shorter legs relative to your height, I gotta point out that it's believed that those differences tend to be less impactful as compared to a dietary risk factor like excess sugar-sweetened beverage consumption, soda. That's because overconsumption of sugar leads to direct metabolic harms that aren't instantly reflected in a person's weight. And when that overconsumption does lead to weight gain, it specifically increases that riskier visceral weight gain. It's not just ethnicity though. The standard BMI scale isn't inclusive when it comes to age either. It's not reliable for those 65 and over. More than half would be classified as overweight or obese, even though many older people wouldn't benefit from weight loss. A somewhat higher BMI can actually be a sign of better health and longevity for older people. Gender is also a problem. The links between BMI and health seem to be different for men and women, and despite this, the BMI scale isn't adjusted for sex. BMI can increase weight bias in healthcare. No matter which way you slice it, obesity is a significant health risk factor. It's inaccurate to pretend it's not. But when someone who's overweight gets sick, their weight isn't always relevant. This might seem like an obvious point, but a common complaint from heavier patients is that BMI comes up at every doctor's appointment, no matter what symptoms they're having. These patients are tired of feeling judged and being told weight loss might help for every single problem. Migraine, diarrhea, leg pain, weird rash, sad a lot? Well, your BMI's a little high. Yeah, look, that does go too far. If a doctor gets hung up on a single number every time, it can prevent them from zooming out and getting a more complete picture. That type of bias leads to negative outcomes, misdiagnosed conditions, delayed and ineffective treatment, and patients not seeking care because they stop trusting us doctors. All that is to ask, if BMI is so flawed, why don't we just stop using it? Well, currently, we don't have a better replacement that's widely available. Even with its limitations, BMI can be effective for population health. You see, population health focuses on trends within and across large groups of people. Screening tools are used to understand how a certain disease is evolving and identify who's at risk. An effective screening tool is one that can be easily rolled out on a massive scale. BMI checks all those boxes. It's non-invasive, inexpensive, and can quickly be calculated at any doctor's visit. And research has shown that BMI is significantly associated with body fat percentage in general. So BMI for individual health, usually not great. On its own, it just doesn't tell me enough most of the time. What we should do is learn to use BMI the right way. The right way means using BMI alongside other medical information to get a more complete picture. Holistic care. Also, how about we put AI to good use here and have it find some patterns that allow us to better stratify risk? We're always talking about AI taking over healthcare. Why not start with crunching millions of numbers to find out the correct cutoffs for diverse groups so that the BMI number can be more valuable for the individual? Anyway, it's more important for doctors to understand how BMI can be both limiting and beneficial for patients. We need to learn how to discuss weight and BMI with sensitivity. This doesn't mean we need to downplay the risk, but we should approach the subject with more care. BMI shouldn't be with us forever, and it won't. In fact, we already have several other tools for measuring body fat. One old school device is body fat calipers. They literally pinch your fat in several areas to make a measurement, but their accuracy is usually meh. A much higher tech option is a DEXA scan. While it's reliable, it also has several drawbacks. It's expensive, it requires pricey equipment, and it exposes you to ionizing radiation. Yeah, that's the type that can cause cancer. However, there is one last method that has recently exploded in popularity, and that's bioelectrical impedance analysis, which uses electrical currents to distinguish body fat from muscle. If you ever stepped on a body fat scale or a body composition scale, then you use BIA. Some predict that it'll eventually become the gold standard to assess obesity risk. But not everyone's sold. There's some evidence that BIA isn't really that much more accurate than BMI. Also, BIA can't be measured without some sort of device, while BMI requires nothing except some basic math. For now, BMI is the imperfect measure we have, and I think we need to realize that it's a tool, and like any tool, it could be misused or misapplied. But in order to use a tool optimally, we need to continue studying and criticizing its pros and cons. Hopefully we did that here, but what about your bones? Are they stronger after they break? I answer that question and so many more directly from you in my comment section. Click here to check that out, and as always, stay happy and healthy.